We took refuge in the good lady's Alcazar, past the pear orchard, just east of Cordoba. It was 2 days after Christmas, 1235, and my brothers and I had just pulled off the greatest piece of military chicanery in centuries. The capital fell to us, by Christ, with but a few strokes of our swords. King Ferdinand and his army wasn't even present to help us in the fight. Had he been, the Almohads surely would have been ready for him, and posted a useful defense. I take nothing away from that great king. He went on to conquer half of Spain. But my king will always be Alfonso IX. He was a great warrior, and I would follow him anywhere. I'm here to discuss my memories, and I haven't even introduced myself yet. My name is Gudestio de Midia, and it was my pleasure to serve my king as a knight in the Holy Order of Alcantara, a military force similar to that of the Knights Templar. 30 years I fought for the order, and I was anticipating a decent retirement. The cuts and bruises gained over decades during the Reconquista was enough for any man. Maybe I would have gone on to master my own compound. Maybe I would just fade away at a monastery someplace. No, not for me. A normal retirement was not in my cards. The Alcazar was owned and managed by a young woman who had inherited the estate due to the tragic and sudden demise of her entire family. The details of their deaths were never told me. Odd that, considering how fascinated I was with her. Yes, Mistress Marquessa and I talked, played mancala, and drank together. Or at least I drank. While she profited from its manufacture, she disliked the taste. I drank so much perry that I lost track of my days. But there was little work for me to do. The Saracens hadn't formed any counterattack, and the servants managed all the housework. But my inaction didn't stop my Leonese brothers, Johann and Arius, who showed concern of my indulgences with this woman, and her fine brew. They felt I was capricious in my, shall we say, familiarity with Marquessa. I understood their point, but I didn't care. The maiden was a pleasure to spend time with. I wanted to do little else. Indeed, for a moment, I imagined leaving the order, and perhaps marrying the good woman. I would not put too fine a point on it, but her desire for me only encouraged my interest. I had never had a woman speak to me the way she had, expressing her great loneliness, her desire to be touched, to feel the warmth that only a man could give her. While never naming me specifically, her wonderful eyes spoke to me of her want. But before I could explore these sentiments further, the Moors attacked. There was only a pack of them, perhaps a scouting party of 20 riders. Perhaps they assembled from nearby villages. Perhaps they were returning from a venture to some distant place. In any case, my brothers and I were not as prepared as we might have been. It was night, and we had already been at the drink. Our equipment was available and in good order, but we didn't have it with us when we heard the galloping horses approach. Additionally, there was only 6 of us. We donned our mail shirts, shields, helmets, and grabbed our weapons, but then heard the screaming of the servants. Johann, Arius, and Jacob followed me as we ran towards the screams. 3 of the Saracens had dismounted, slain 2 servants, and were raiding a food cupboard when we fell on them. Our spears pierced their mail shirts, such piercings to which they would only briefly respond. Sadly, the tip of my spear broke off after I had stabbed into the eye of the 3rd bleeding man. I drew my beloved sword, a gift to me of the blessed Santa Casilda, and searched for more attackers. I hoped my lady was secure, but we fought on, speeding towards the sounds of terror. Johann took an arrow to the neck from a horse archer that we could do little about. Propped against the doorway, I could see that he was dead. I plunged into the main house where I found Yakum. He had had his weapon hand cut off. He grasped the bloody stump, lying in agony, but would suffer only briefly, I feared. We were losing the engagement. Then two of the largest men I had ever seen, Saracens both, entered my chamber. They stared at me with devilish intent. A third entered bearing a bow. I turned deeper into the house and raced away from the attackers. Reaching the end of a long hall, I turned just in time to block an arrow with my shield. Through one door, then another, I found a dead end. A cube of a room, barely enough space to swing a sword. There I found her, the Lady Marquessa, standing in a corner, wrapped in a robe. My heart stirred, happy that she still lived. But I knew there was no time for pleasantries. "We can't stay here," I remembered telling her. "They will burn the house down with us in it." Indeed, I could smell the smoke already. I heard approaching footsteps coming towards us and spun around to face the open portal. "Give me your knife," I heard her meek voice instruct from behind. I frowned, but realized that we were near the end there, stuck in the corner of the house of flame. I pulled my dagger and tossed it back to the bare top of a tea cart. I stared wide-eyed as she caught it by the handle before it hit the wood. But then they were upon us. I closed the distance to gain the advantage of my sword, knocking the spears of the large dark-skinned Moors away. I sliced across the unprotected face of the first assailant that came through the door, blinding and opening a rent that would continue its crimson fount until his death. He dropped his spear but didn't give up the fight, drawing and swinging his kukri, which glanced off the wide brim of my helmet. The good lady thrust next to me, plunging the dagger through the gap in his armpit and into the man's heart. Had I a moment to consider this piercing attack at the time, I would have recognized that this was the strike of an expert. My lady was indeed full of surprises. But the next Saracen was stabbing at me with a spear. I blocked with my shield, causing his vicious spear point to skittle away to my right. Sadly, Marquessa had no shield. The length of the spearhead sank deep into her abdomen, and with a desperate "Urk!" she fell back, crashing into the tea cart. I remember little of the fight after that, as anger burned my soul. I came to my senses in the next room, gasping for breath, leaning against the table. Around me lay the bodies of 6 Saracens I had apparently slain. Their bodies were cut open in wide rents. Tangled guts had spilled out. A bowman was decapitated. The fight was but seconds long, and in all these years I still remember the carnage. At once I went to the good lady, needed to be there for her in her last moments. Though I could hear the flames engulfing the house, I would not deprive her of company at the time of her death. She was crumpled on the floor, her blood-soaked robe wrapped around her as she held herself. She had also taken a crossbow bolt at some time in the fight, half its length buried in her shoulder. "Is this death?" she whispered. I collapsed next to her, lay next to her, that I might hold her frail body next to mine. "I'm so cold," she said as she hugged my arm against her breast. She kissed my bloodied hand. Again, I remember little of what happened the rest of the night. Something happened, of course, or someone. I went weak. I felt I couldn't even move. My mind was filled with darkness, a black void with no direction to turn. When I woke, as I choose to call it, I was in another building, an outbuilding, not engulfed by flame. The Lady Marquessa and I rose, lying together under a mountain of blankets in an empty stable. This was the first night in a symphony of nights that we would share. She taught me how to live, so to speak. And when I look back at these words, typed by me, shining back at me from my desktop monitor, I am amazed by how much I could remember. The last time I saw Marquessa was during the Peasant War of 1525. But the separation has helped me find my own way. Finally, I would say thank you, dear listener, for being there, that I might share my origin story with you.